Welcome to tonight's video, Pokémon Go Horror Stories. Join me as we delve into the terrifying tales that unfolded during gameplay. Pokémon Go's innovative augmented reality and nostalgic charm captivated millions, turning everyday walks into thrilling adventures. Yet for some, the Pokémon chase took a dark turn. The tragic story of Jiansheng Chen, a 60-year-old grandfather who lost his life in a senseless shooting on January 26, 2017, while playing, hauntingly reminds us that reality and nightmare can blur. Tonight, we'll explore chilling Pokémon Go stories, questioning the true cost of catching them all. Let's begin. We ventured into the unknown, seeking rare Pokémon in the shadows of Oakwood, Texas. But our hunt for virtual creatures turned into a real-life nightmare. Here's the story. My friend Marcus and I had been playing Pokémon Go for weeks, and our competitive spirits drove us to explore every nook and cranny. So, when our phones buzzed with excitement, signaling a rare Scyther nearby, we didn't hesitate. We made our way to a deserted alleyway, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic. As we walked deeper into the alley, the fading light cast long shadows across the ground. We were so focused on catching the Scyther that we didn't notice the eerie atmosphere. But as we turned a corner, our excitement turned to fear. A group of rough-looking men emerged from the darkness, their eyes fixed greedily on us. "What do you have in those backpacks?" one of them growled, taking a menacing step closer. Marcus and I exchanged nervous glances, our hearts racing. Just as the man took another step closer, we spotted an abandoned building to our left. Without hesitation, we sprinted towards it, bursting through the creaky door just in time. But our relief was short-lived. The men followed us inside, their footsteps echoing off the walls. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. Marcus tried to protect me, but we were outnumbered. In a desperate attempt to call for help, we reached for our phones, only to realize we had no cell phone reception. We were completely cut off from the outside world. With no other choice, we huddled together in the darkness, waiting for the sunrise. The hours ticked by at a glacial pace. Our senses heightened as we listened for any sign of movement. Finally, the first light of dawn crept through the grimy windows, casting a pale glow over the abandoned building. We knew we had to get out of there, and fast. As we emerged from the building, we didn't hesitate. We ran outside, our feet pounding the pavement as we sprinted away from the danger behind us. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the police cars parked nearby, their lights flashing in the morning light. Breathless and shaken, we told the officers our story. They listened intently, their faces grim with concern, and asked us to show them that place. We nodded, still trying to process the events of the night. The police escorted us back to the abandoned building, their guns drawn. As we approached the entrance, I felt a chill run down my spine. But when we entered the building, there was no sign of the men. It was as if the whole ordeal had been a nightmare. The officers searched the area but found nothing, and they advised not visit such sketchy areas in such late nights. I still get nightmares of what happened that fateful night. That's why I am now more careful than ever. Shayla Wiggins, a 19-year-old from Riverton, Wyoming, had an experience that was both shocking and surreal while playing Pokémon Go. On a sunny morning, she decided to explore the area near the Big Wind River, hoping to catch some water-type Pokémon. As she walked along the riverbank, her eyes were glued to her phone screen, eagerly searching for virtual creatures. Suddenly, something in the water caught her attention. At first, she thought it might be a large fish or debris, but as she got closer, she realized it was a human body floating face down in the water. Overwhelmed with shock and fear, Shayla immediately dialed 911 and reported her discovery. She stayed on the scene, anxiously waiting for the authorities to arrive. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office responded quickly, and upon their arrival, they confirmed that the body was indeed that of a deceased person. The initial investigations suggested that the death was accidental, likely due to drowning, and there were no signs of foul play. I had been playing Pokémon Go for months, determined to complete my collection. I heard about a rare Pokémon that was supposed to appear in a specific part of the city. The location was a quiet alleyway, hidden in a corner of the city I had never explored before. As I walked to the alley, I felt both excited and nervous. There were rumors about strange things happening in this area, and I didn't know what to expect. But I was determined to catch that Pokémon, no matter what. When I arrived, the alley was empty. I felt a bit relieved. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and started the game. I waited for what felt like forever for the raid to start. My eyes glued to the screen. Minutes passed, and I started to feel uneasy. I was alone in the alley, and the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Then, I saw him. A tall, thin guy with sunken eyes lurking in the distance. He wore tattered clothes. I tried to focus on my phone, but my instincts told me to stay alert. Time passed, and the guy kept staring at me with an unsettling intensity. I wondered if he was also waiting for the raid. But his behavior seemed too suspicious. I didn't want to approach him, fearing that would be awkward. Just as I started to relax, a second guy appeared out of nowhere. He walked up to the first guy, and they exchanged some words. The raid started, and I tried to focus on the game, distracting myself from the ominous atmosphere. But when I glanced up, my heart skipped a beat. The two guys were standing in front of me, their faces lit by the faint glow of the streetlights. The first guy handed a small bag to the second, who gave him a wad of cash. The transaction was quick, but I knew exactly what I had just witnessed: a drug deal. As they exchanged the goods, their demeanor changed. The first guy seemed agitated, his eyes darting around. The second guy sneered, his hand on his hip. Suddenly, the first guy started yelling at him. The atmosphere grew tense, their voices rising in anger. The second guy snarled and pulled out a gun from his waistband. The first guy did the same, his eyes wild with fear. I froze, my mind racing with terror. The guys stood there, guns drawn, their faces twisted in rage and desperation. Just as it seemed like things were about to get out of hand, a police patrol car turned into the alley, its lights flashing. The two guys saw the cops and immediately ran in opposite directions, dropping their guns and abandoning their argument. I watched in relief as they disappeared into the night, the police car chasing after them. I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind a dumpster, my heart still pounding. I straight went off to my house because I thought if I say something, the police might question me as well. I just had the absolute crap scared out of me while walking around playing Pokémon Go late at night. I can't be sure anything truly weird happened because it was dark, and I might have let my imagination run away with me. But damn, did it ever give my spine a tingle? Some background. I live in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, in an old, established suburb that tends to be very quiet. There's no crime to speak of, apart from the occasional burglary, and it's perfectly safe to walk around at night. It's very green, with lots of old trees, and there's a beautiful creek reserve running down one side of it. It's a really nice place to live. I got into Pokémon Go a few weeks ago, and it's been great for getting me to get out there and exercise. My Fitbit reports that my steps per day have more than doubled since I started playing, meaning it's the most effective exercise tool I've used in years. For those who haven't played, Pokémon Go is a free game played on your mobile phone. You walk around the real world and catch little digital creatures, which you then train up and use to fight other players' creatures. You also collect eggs and have to walk long distances to hatch them. Anyway, tonight I went out walking in the dead of night because I had a few eggs to hatch. So I figured I'd get some exercise and see if I could finish them off and maybe catch a few new Pokémon while I was at it. I was about 4 blocks from home when I decided I'd walked enough and it was time to head back. I decided to cover some different ground, so I took a left, intending to walk around the block and head home on a different street. So there I was, walking along this cross street, phone held out in front of me with the screen on and about to turn left and head back toward home. From my right, across the road, I heard a really weird noise, kind of a whimpering combined with a rasping noise. I looked, but there was a big old tree casting a shadow from the streetlight, so it was just a pool of darkness that my eyes couldn't penetrate. My first thought was that a big dog had gotten out of its yard, and I worried it might be vicious. There have been a dozen or so cases of dogs getting out and mauling people at night in the last decade or so in Melbourne, so it was a real, if remote, risk. Then I heard the scuff of a shoe on concrete, and I realized someone walking towards me through the patch of darkness. I could very faintly see just a pair of legs in silhouette, but nothing else. I got a vague sense of a very tall, very skinny man, but not unnaturally so. We're not talking slendy here, just a tallish, skinny-ish regular person. What really freaked me out, though, was the noise he was making. I had mistaken it for a dog whimpering, but it was him. He was kind of squeaking in a high-pitched voice, but it was muffled and oddly strangled. I was frozen for a few seconds as he walked closer. Then I decided, fuck it. I was turning my back on him and heading home at a very brisk walk. As I walked, I could hear him behind me, still making those weird muffled squeaks, and occasionally I could hear his shoes scraping on the footpath. I'm a big guy, fairly imposing to look at, so I've been told. So I very rarely feel unsafe when out at night. But this guy was freaking me right out. I didn't want to look back, but I found I couldn't keep walking with this freak behind me and not at least get a look at him and see how far behind me he was. So, without slowing down, I turned and looked. He was about 15 meters behind me, 50 feet or so, and even though he was out from under the shadow of the tree and had crossed the road, all I could see of him was a silhouette. A rational part of my brain was trying to tell me that he was just listening to music and was singing along. Very badly. And he thought he was being quiet and didn't realize I could hear him, but I couldn't see any headphones on his head. He was just a black shape, but I was genuinely scared now. My nerve broke, and I crossed the road. I glanced back again as I crossed, and he was still there, 15 meters or so back, and he was still just a silhouette. I honestly couldn't tell you an age or a racial background. He was a shadow, nothing more. That wouldn't have been the most unnerving thing about him, if it wasn't for that damned whimpering noise he kept making. I finished crossing and just walked faster, going as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. I can walk at a pretty brisk pace, but that high-pitched murmuring was still behind me and seemed to be louder. I was on the edge of panic now, and I looked back one more time. He was right behind me. Without making any scuffing sounds on the path, he had closed in right behind me. He was less than 5 meters away, about the length of a big sedan, and he was still making that creepy whimpering sound. Part of me was determined that this was all completely rational, and it said, okay, he's seen my phone, and I'm about to be mugged. That's all this is, just a guy, probably a drug addict, who wants to steal my phone. I was trying to suppress the other parts of my mind that were screaming that something was very wrong. And this definitely wasn't just a mugging. I looked forward again and tried to walk faster. Then the noise behind me stopped. Here it comes, I thought, and glanced behind. He was gone. The footpath behind me was empty. I nearly tripped over in surprise. He had vanished in less than 2 seconds. I looked into the front yard he had been right beside, but I couldn't see him. It felt like a trap, like I was meant to drop my guard. But I didn't care. I got out of there at top speed, jogged the last 2 blocks home, and didn't feel safe until I was inside with the door locked. That's it, like I said. Most of it could have been my imagination. But several elements really felt off. The sudden burst of speed was the most worrying. He closed 2/3 of the distance between us in just a few seconds without making any noise. It was freaky.